grateful to both of you for being able to meet on such short notice and talk a little bit about your take on the conclave and, maybe a perspective on the conclave process and the UK perspective on top, papabilia, because, maybe it's different than it is in the United States. It probably isn't, but I'd love to get your perspective on that. Just as a intro, though, I have to share this picture. Let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. I was I was really, just amazed at, let me see if I can pull this up here and enlarge this. This picture, Prince William coming to the funeral along with Starmer. And, and so let me see if I can share that real quick with you. Can you both see that? Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and what's remarkable to me, I mean, of course, Prince William, I think everybody loves him, and it was sad that I think Prince Charles couldn't attend. I'm sure, with ongoing healing from the cancer. But Starmer, on the other hand, love to get your take on that because he's a proclaimed atheist, but I guess as a head of state.
Well, so's Prince William, as far as we know. He's not interested in religion at all.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I did
Yeah.
not know
So
that.
Prince Charles does say that he's interested in religion, but most of his pronouncements are about Islam. So
Right,
there's some
right.
speculation whether he's quietly converted to.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I will say I was disappointed in King Charles because it does seem like he's become an Islamist for sure. And the Pope, Pope Francis seemed to give him the two thumbs up, with his ecumenical nature, because everything leads to heaven, of course.
Mm,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just thought I'd share that in the opening. Of course, in the United States, people weren't focused on the prayer or Pope Francis' funeral. They were focused on Trump's blue suit. Um,
Keeping it real, like Pope Francis.
keeping it real, yeah. Anyway, all right. So I wanted to jump into it on the conclave, because we do know, I mean, I don't know if you ever read the book Saint Gallen Mafia, but there was some real intrigue, and supposition about the conclave process and how it might have violated the process in 2005 and 2012 leading into the selection of Pope Francis. Even in Pope Francis's book that he put out in 2014. So I don't know. I mean, I'd love to get your take on the, do you believe that the current conclave process is respected by cardinals? Because maybe the St. Gallen Mafia book is just a bunch of bunk. I don't know, but I'd love to get your perspective on this.
I think there is a certain amount of respect for the process, simply because the cardinals are part of that organization, so that it's like a kind of self-respect, if nothing else. And obviously it's guided and formed by this apostolic constitution from 1996, which is Universi Dominici Gregis. And I think that the fact that it's steeped in centuries of tradition, and it's their lives are involved, their whole lives are this church. So I think the actual process itself, yes, I think they will all take it very, very seriously. But the question really that we're asking is, if if they're taking it seriously and they're liberal progressives, then they're going to be fighting for a liberal progressive pope, aren't they? And they're not really, like, they have to take an oath of obedience and an oath to uphold the faith. But we already know that cardinals like McElroy, from America, and also just to chuck a couple of names out there, Vicky. Cardinal Hollerich, for example. It's no McElroy has been called a heretic by his brother bishops. Hollerich has stood up and publicly declared that the church has got it wrong on homosexuality. So, you've got we know that we've got cardinals in there who don't believe what the church teaches. So how valid are those promises?
Right.
It's difficult to think that they'd be particularly valid, isn't it?
Yeah, very well said.
Yeah, I was looking at Ed Pentin's put together the College of Cardinals report, and one of the points that he was making is that a lot of cardinals will be unknown to the electors, and so this is in part to try and help them and help everyone to see what kind of figures we're looking at. So he's gone through. You can check it out on the website collegeofcardinals.com, and he goes through like climate change, the synod, female ordination, same-sex marriage, and takes all of those, whatever you want to call them, hot button issues or controversial issues, and says, where does he see from what he knows, where does he see the different cardinals positioned on that? So that's really helpful. So whilst I agree with Mark, I think they'll take it seriously. And like you say, Mark, what does that mean? If they're liberal progressives, that's a worry. So they will take it seriously. But part of it is how well informed are they in order to take it seriously? If you're going to take something seriously, you have to really be well informed before making an important decision. So I think something like this report from Ed Pentin has been really helpful.
Yeah, I agree with you.
There's another really important issue, I think, Vicky, is I've been worried listening to Cardinal Ray's homily at Pope Francis. You've got a situation where we've just seen a massive growth in people being welcomed into the church at Easter here in the UK. And you have to wonder, are the cardinals reading this as a result of Pope Francis's papacy? If they are, and they're likely to, there was a newspaper report in the Telegraph here in the UK by Katherine Pepinster, who was the former editor of the Tablet, which is like the progressive Catholic paper. And she was saying that it was down to Catholic schools. I mean, watch Bennett laugh, because, like one thing we know is that Catholic schools are leading our children out of the faith in the UK, not into it, because they, instead of teaching the faith properly, the vast majority of them, actually ridicule it. They're not employing Catholic teachers. They teach the faith from a sort of external position, like this is what these people believe. And they've got sort of a schmaltzy sacramentalism that I think children can see through the hypocrisy immediately. But the point is that this is an establishment figure saying that the establishment are winning. Look, we're winning, that our policies are working. And listening to Cardinal Ray's homily, you have to wonder if that's what they're thinking, that the cardinals are thinking, oh, look, there's a great resurgence. Look at all the people here, even though there were less than there were at JP2's funeral and Benedict XVI's. Are they thinking, oh, this is amazing? They come off the high of the funeral and this great exposition of the faith. And you have to wonder if they're going into the conclave thinking, yes, we need more Francis. I don't know how that is possible. And all of us faithful lay Catholics are all going, this was a complete disaster. This 12 years of hell, and we're so relieved it's over. And all he did was cause division and promoted heretics. And, but
I can't think that though. Really, from an internal perspective, they can't. We know that the media and the mainstream press, really buy into that presentation of Francis, but they're internal, and so in the UK, for example, some of the really good bishops, they will know where that growth is, and that growth is not in the happy clappy, kind of let's just leave people where they are. The growth is in young people searching for truth, searching for answers in a world that is increasingly chaotic, and it's in spite of the ambiguity under this pontificate, under Pope Francis, not because of. And I think they will know that. Whether they use the uptake for their own reasons is another matter. But I don't think they'd be so foolish as to think, hey, we've got all this growth in the church because we've had this wonderfully ambiguous pontificate.
Well, even Hollerich and Grech.
Well, I thought we were talking about, I was thinking about in particular the growth in the UK. So So I would say, for example, Cardinal Nichols will know full well where that growth is happening. And Cardinal Nichols, I know there are some concerns over some positions he's taken, but he's come out really strong in the UK against the assisted suicide bill. He's spoken up bravely, and I do hear that he has, there's a lot of wonderful traditional masses just quietly taking place, and so I think he's no fool, put it that way. But that's more of a UK particular.
Well, and I want to hear the UK particular, because we're even seeing in France, look at the record number of young people that have woken up and decided to come into the church. And remarkably, they are traditional. And I use the word traditional in terms of trying to preserve orthodoxy, trying to preserve the sacredness and the beauty of the faith and the fullness of the doctrine. And that might be in traditional Latin Mass, or it may not be, but it's the fullness of the doctrine. And I love to see this. And I wrote a blog right after Pope Francis died. He actually, I'll give him credit for this, I'll give him a toast. He made me holier, because every single time he did something heretical, it made me drive closer to the sacraments and to my rosary. And so, remarkably, that may be why we're seeing more young people enter into the faith. So
true. And that's the Lord writes straight with crooked implements, doesn't he? And you see it all through scripture. I think you're absolutely spot on, Vicki. I think the explosion that we're seeing in people coming to the church is because people like us, lay people, are getting online and saying, oh no, the Pope's wrong about this, and explaining the beauty of the tradition. And people are being affected by it and coming looking for orthodoxy, looking for tradition.
Yeah. And in that sense, maybe Pope Francis has done a favor in kind of, because like it's coincided, hasn't it, with the this has been going on for a long time, but it seems to kind of be real peak, with all the movements under Biden, and we have problems with Starmer now, with the chaos around gender ideology and false anthropologies and lies to our children and mind-molding media and Hollywood and pushing narratives and chaos, and kids being told you got to get on your knees and say you're sorry for your whiteness. I mean, kids ultimately, there comes a point where I think they must look and go, what's going on? I don't understand what's going on. This is all madness. And when they see how mad everything is, and then within the church, they're seeing, who am I to judge? And that's being taken by the press and said that, I remember kids saying to me 10 years ago, you know what? Pope Francis says you can get married if you're gay. Well, he never said any such thing, but it was allowed to run. Those kind of narratives were allowed to run. And so chaos everywhere, no incoherence. And so the young people are sick of it. They're fed up to the back teeth of it. And they're just longing and yearning for truth. St. Augustine's, you've created us for yourself, O Lord, our hearts are restless. There's a real restlessness. And so perhaps Pope Francis contributed to that kind of restlessness. And therefore, as you've said, it has made young people, certainly the young people I know, and there's many, are saying, wow, does the faith teach this? Like just this kind of anchor, which we want to hang on to. Yeah, it does. That's beautiful, so they're seeing that.
Yeah. I what's remarkable to me too is we're starting to see some of these cardinals that are part of the conclave, and even those that are a little aged out, become quite vocal, and I don't know how much influence they're going to have in the process. Maybe you have some perspective on one or two of those that might be front runners, how much influence they have, because I would imagine that the cardinals themselves, as they're meeting, and there is so much secrecy in the process because they can't use their phones, all of the votes are burned, at the end each day. So are they pulling cardinals aside that are the papabile and asking them questions that would get to the point that it would point as to how they would govern as a pope. And what question, if you were that cardinal, what kind of questions would you pose to the top candidates? What would you ask?
Well, I think to your first point, this was how Pope Francis was elected in the last conclave. So we knew that basically, and it's amazing how much of a hand in it the English contingent had. So so we know this because there was a meeting at the English College in Rome where Cardinal Vincent was there, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, and a couple of other English-speaking cardinals. And this was the topic of discussion. And basically, Cardinal Cormac was pushing for Bergoglio. That was what he was. So they were made cardinals together. So they sat in consistory together. You sit next to the cardinals that you were made on the same year as. So they were like buddies, and they both got this sort of progressive agenda. So basically, there was a conversation, and then Cardinal Cormac had people going round rallying for Pope Francis, and he was part of this St. Gallen thing, as you know, and so there's no doubt at all that this is what goes on. And I've already heard that there was a meeting at the Domus Australia on Saturday night of 18 cardinals, including Burke and Muller. Now, it's only given, especially the situation where the cardinals don't actually know each other very well. There have got to be situations where they talk about the seriousness of what's going on, and that who are the papabile, what candidates. It makes me think that we haven't really got a clue who, I mean, there are names being bandied around in terms of papabile, but I don't know really how accurate they are. But people are talking. I think probably the most likely candidate, it seems at the moment, is Cardinal Parolin, because he would be a continuity candidate. He's also quite old, and it's like a bit of an open secret that he's got cancer. So that could work in his favour or against him. I think it might mean it sort of guarantees the shortness of his papacy. So, and I think he's seen as a safe pair of hands. Now, really interestingly, Vicki, this was something that's just happened. I don't know if you've been following, but Cardinal Becciu, do you remember Cardinal Becciu?
Oh, I wanted you to talk about this. Good.
So he was the first cardinal who was tried in the Vatican court and convicted, and he basically had his cardinal privileges removed, and then he sort of was reinstated by Pope Francis. There was all this to-in and fro-in, and it seems that there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. And I heard Edward Pentin talking about it today, but I've actually got a contact in Rome who's following this very, very closely. Now, he says that, yes, he's guilty, Becciu is guilty. And he obviously was the one who cancelled the audit by PricewaterhouseCoopers on the Vatican Bank that was ordered by Cardinal Pell. So they were at loggerheads together. But Cardinal Pell, in his Demos document, actually stuck up for Becciu and said, do you not remember that? So he actually put in that document that Becciu has not been treated fairly. He's not received justice, right? So the point is, they were trumped up charges. So he was scapegoated, and Parolin and Pope Francis basically put a load of extra stuff on it. Now, the reason that he has been going forward and saying, I've got a right to vote in the conclave. And that what they wanted to do was to force the hand of Parolin to produce a document from Pope Francis that said that he was excluded, because they know Becciu will talk against Bergoglio and he will talk against Parolin. So he is the anti-Parolin voice in the conclave. So there's talk now that he'll go to the press instead, because he's been excluded from the cardinalate. The way that they managed to do that was by putting pressure on him and saying to him that, look, this is really going to look bad, etc. So who knows, whether he'll go, yeah, it's bad for the church, I'm not going to do it, or whether he will actually come up with those goods. But the letter that Parolin has produced excluding him was written on the day that he was supposed to be either admitted or let out of the Gemelli. So Pope Francis is so when he couldn't talk or anything like that. So the whole thing stinks of a fix, of a setup. And it would, you know, you kind of think whatever way, hopefully that information will get through to the cardinals that, you know, Parolin is not really someone to be trusted. Obviously, there's also the China deal, which we must keep talking about, you know, where basically they handed the church over to the communists, and they kept the agreement document secret. Now, why would you keep the agreement document secret? There's only one reason I can think of, and that's that you don't want anyone to know what's in it, you know?
Exactly.
So
It,
the Parolin, you know, I think he might be seen as a safe pair of hands, and he's certainly a moderate, you know, he's a middle of the road sort of. If there is a mix up between a dust off between the progressives and the more traditional, then he might be a sort of a middle of the road candidate. But there's lots of mess floating around him as well that makes him, you know,
yeah.
a bad
Do,
choice.
do you think Cardinal Zen is going to have any influence with the Cardinals? Is he well respected, or do you think he's only going to be heard by the most conservative Cardinals in their base?
Well, this is the crazy thing about Zen. I don't think Zen is hugely conservative. From, you know, he's not like Burke, but he is orthodox. You know, he believes in the church and the truth of the gospel, and that's what he has stood for. I don't think he's, you know, we make a mistake sometimes when we put people in these partisan, you know, political envelopes. Like, and we're trying to say, oh, he's in this camp or he's not. I think the thing about Zen, why he's been brought to our attention, is that he's the most experienced cardinal in China, and he was ignored by Francis. Francis didn't want his, you know, because he was saying first privately, you know, as the gospel teaches us, and then more vocally when he was ignored, that this is a bad thing for the Chinese church. But Pope Francis didn't want to hear that, so he just excluded him. He wouldn't meet with him. He was too busy meeting Bono and, you know, Biden and all. He had a full diary, so he couldn't see the old cardinal. And I think that you'd have to be insane not to see Zen as a voice of wisdom. I love the stuff that he writes on his little Chinese blog. You know, if you ever read it,
Gosh,
it's
I
so
know.
good. He's such a gem. So
He's
you
a
know,
treasure. He really is a
I
treasure.
really hope that they do listen to him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have this like off the wall question. Is there anything in the conclave process that you think is the most effective to the decision making? I mean, what part of it do you think is the most effective, and what part of it isn't?
I think it's the oath of secrecy probably is the most
Yeah.
effective
Yeah.
ritual, because it's taken by all the cardinals and the support staff, and it binds them to silence under the penalty of excommunication. So that should really ensure that the process remains free from leaks, and I think they do take that seriously. So I think the thing is that it shields the cardinals participating from the influence of secular powers or the media. That's the idea of it. Is so obviously it comes from like medieval times when kings would regularly interfere, and we think that all that's done and dusted with. But as you pointed out at the beginning, look at all the dignitaries turning up, all the world leaders turning up to Pope Francis's funeral. You have to see the soft power of the papacy there. You know, the fact that it matters, that the faith matters. And all the commentary on this side of the pond, anyway, was very much in awe of the tradition and the fact that it goes back 2,000 years. And this was all the talk on the media. So they do look at the church, and it does have an effect on them. There were some really powerful, moving stories about that.
And the instinct for ritual is in all, you know, we all have that. And that's why I think people are drawn to it. I did hear somebody say, I think I agree with you, Mark, by the way, the oath of secrecy there is really important tradition. And I did hear someone say, maybe they should burn Laudato Si to create the white smoke when it comes up.
We'd all applaud them.
We'd all applaud them. But Vicki, you said what would you know, if you were a fly on the wall, what would you be looking for? That kind of thing. And it might have been Bernard of Clairvaux, I don't know, but there's been some talk about what like the ideal pope should be. And one thing that really hit me in what I read is this idea of not being an activist, you know, not being an activist, to remember what is the purpose, what is the role of a pope? Because in some of the commentary, especially in the UK, we've had people people who perhaps even should know otherwise, saying, you see, the role of the Pope is to speak up for justice and to be a figurehead for, you know, all these kind of causes, to be an activist for a cause. And I think that's not ultimately what a Pope is. So I would want to be saying humility is something I would be looking for, you know, that kind of humility, and not being an activist, ultimately teaching and praying, teaching the faith unambiguously and praying. And another thing that I thought struck me, and I said, yeah, this is something you'd want to look for, is, you know, the way you hear people say you can judge a person by their friends. Like, who are these candidates' friends? Who are they known to surround themselves with people known for their goodness, their virtue? None of us are perfect, but who are their friends? You know, that's something I think would also be quite telling in
Shame
terms
they
of,
didn't look at that with Pope Francis, isn't it?
oh, well, yeah. He had the dirt on everyone though, didn't he? So yeah, and it's what and Pizza Boll has come up. Pizza Boll, Cardinal Pizza Boller's name has come up, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. And I hear, you know, it's always, as Mark says, a fool's errand to try and guess. You know, it's always someone that you're not, you know, you didn't expect. But that he's quite a unifying figure. People are saying that he's one to watch, has friends on all sides, seemed to be quite a strong administrator, which is also something that would be required. And he's 60, just turned 60. So maybe a good age, depending on, like I know Mark was talking about Parolin and having this transitional short pontificate maybe would be better. We don't know, but his name's coming up a lot, and it seems that whether he's Pope or not, he's certainly cardinal to watch.
That's
I love,
excellent.
I
You
love
know, go
Pizza
ahead.
Balla. You know, I love Pizza Balla at the beginning of the when the hostage crisis started in Gaza.
Yeah.
You know, he offered to submit himself instead of the children, you know, that were being held hostage by Hamas. I thought that was incredibly brave, you know, really. And he's really conducted himself well, I think, through navigated it. It does look a bit like he's campaigning for the papacy. So,
What, like Turkson?
I'm
well, that was
fully
last time Turkson put up posters, didn't he, all over Rome? Yeah.
I'm fully expecting QR codes with business cards being handed out at the conclave.
Yeah, something like that.
You know, with a website featuring all of their, you know, Pope qualities. Oh, you know, what is the deal with Macron trying to basically torpedo Sarah? Have you noticed this?
Yeah, well, it makes sense, doesn't it, really? Because that would be a disaster. Like Sarah would be an absolute disaster for Macron, just the way Pope Francis was brilliant for Macron. And because it's like, you know, globalism on steroids, isn't it, with him? So,
Oh
yeah, it
my
makes perfect
goodness.
sense to me. Sarah is really awesome. But Katherine met him, actually, didn't you, Katherine?
Yeah, met him briefly when he came to London. Wonderful. You know, my children met him, and he just had time for everybody. He was absolutely mobbed. He was mobbed with,
Oh,
and he just had time. He was so gentle and spoke, you know, just spoke as he writes, you know, clear, orthodox, holy, strong. He's a really strong figure. I don't know that it seems unlikely to me that he would be Pope, but I'd certainly be very happy if he was.
yeah, I would too. He would be at the top of my list, but mainly because of his absolute clarity. I mean, you know, you can argue, oh, Pope Francis didn't really mean 75% of what he said. He had a chance to clear it up
Sure.
many times, and he didn't. So, I probably the greatest reason for Sarah is because of his clarity, you know, in
What's the betting?
communication.
What's the betting? Some of the mainstream press will go, a female Pope, Sarah.
Yeah, get it wrong. Yeah.
What's this?
Absolutely, absolutely. So from a UK perspective, if you had the vote, who would it be, and who do you think the UK people would vote for?
Radcliffe, isn't it, Mark?
Stop it. Have a word. Oh dear. I think I'd like Sarah or Pizza Balla. Pizza Balla has impressed me a lot with some of the things he said. I've seen some of the very outspoken Christian positions that he's taken, you know, very much like we have to preach the gospel. It's not that all religions, you know, you think in that position, which is very much a milieu between Islam and Judaism, and that he'd sort of be trying to be nice to everyone. But he's actually, what I've seen of him, he's really outspoken and, you know, sort of really standing up for the gospel and for Christ. So I wouldn't be at all upset if it was Pete Sabella. You know, he strikes me as someone who could do the job, like Katherine said, someone really quite competent. But I think the guy I'd really like to see is Basuna Ambongo, you know, the guy from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So he's the head of the Bishops' Conference, Vicki, and he's the guy who took the African Bishops' Conference out of Fiducia Supplicans. He's the one who said to the Pope, "No, we're not doing that. Get lost." And
oh my goodness, he's
Right.
my hero.
Yeah,
He
he's
is my
awesome.
hero. Oh my
And he's
gosh.
properly orthodox. We met one of his bishops at the Catholic Identity Conference last year. We sat on the table with him, weren't we,
Yeah.
Katherine? And he was super impressive as well, wasn't he?
Gosh, that is so
really
great.
good.
Oh my God.
There's a lot of talk about Erdo, and I don't know a great deal. I've heard he's a good canonist, and that would be something appealing, especially after again, we speak about Pope Francis. As you say, people say, oh, he didn't mean this, but it was always that ambiguity, that lack of clarity. So someone who's a really good canonist who's able to teach with clarity. But these,
Yes.
yeah, I'm with Mark on the names, Sarah, Pete Spoller, Ambongo, and Erdo. But we'll see, because I'm sure we'll be surprised.
Yeah,
I know.
mean, Burke would be my absolute first pick, but we're not. I mean, I don't know what you think, Vicki, but I've always heard that there will never be an American Pope because it would centralize too much power in one place. So that's why they sort of.
It won't happen. It won't happen. In the Detroit Free Press, they were trying to debate that it would be Tobin, Nighty Night Tobin. And I said,
Lord preserve us. Yeah.
Oh God, let's get down on
Where's
your
the
knees
exorcism
now.
kit?
Start praying every exorcism prayer right now. You know, no, it's not going to be an
Supich, I
American.
don't know who'd be worse. It'd be a competition, wouldn't it?
It
It
would
just
be.
shut the church, wouldn't it? In within 10 years, like, you
Oh
know.
my gosh. Yeah, it would send us into the end times. Absolutely into the end times. Oh
I'm
yeah.
really hoping now that, you know, everyone sees, and as Katherine spoke to earlier on, I really hope and pray that's right, and that my nightmare scenario of them thinking that they're all doing brilliant isn't coming true. And, you know, I really hope they can see, if you think they're bankrupt, you know, like we've had 12 years of Pope Francis, they're bankrupt. You know, the visitors into the Vatican have diminished. We've got no mass in St. Peter's. Thanks, Pope Francis. What sort of a pope bans mass in St. Peter's? And so how can anyone think any of this is good? You know, we've got like Traditionis Custodes, which all the bishops have just ignored. We've got the Synod on Synodality, where we know because they wrote it down. You had Bishop Barron, Archbishop Wilson here from Southwark, Archbishop Fisher from Australia, the guy from Poland who, if I say his name if I try and say it on the video, loads of people will say, "Oh, that's not how you pronounce it," so I'm not going to bother. But like all those, they have all written down the fact that synodality is a load of old rubbish. You know, so they're like, and these are the people really that I would like to see made cardinals in the next round. So that's another thing we have to put on our list. You know, imagine that people who really care about the church, and all these silly liberals, they're about to be pushed out of the envelope anyway. So, you know, the church is growing, as Katherine said, only in one direction. And what really upset me about Traditionis Custodes was that it was fear of that direction which brought it about. And you think anyone who's working with the Holy Spirit would say, where is the Holy Spirit working? You know, where's the fruit? And you'd encourage that. No, look at all these young children marching across France. We'd better put a stop to it. Quick, write a letter, Cardinal Roche.
I know. I mean, yeah, let's target the group where the growth is the greatest. I mean, yeah, that sounds like it makes sense. I mean, yeah, fear and trepidation, you know, I mean, it just didn't make any sense at all. But you know what? It's all about inclusiveness. Let's open wide the tent.
And then look what God does, look what God does. I remember Mark saying this when Bishop Barron talked to what's his name, Sheila Booth. Do you remember, like a couple of years ago? And he was preparing to play Padre Pio.
Padre Pio.
And Mark was like, look at that, here comes this crazy Hollywood superstar around the time that the Pope's quashing the traditional mass. He goes and, learns this role and suddenly is speaking to Bishop Barron about how much he loves the tradition, how much he loves the traditional mass. And it's just so, you just couldn't have predicted that. And then he, like you were saying, Mark, this is what God does, is you can't crush goodness, truth and beauty. And we see, we're an Easter people. We're here. We're following Easter. And what happens? Well, we saw what happened when the enemy thought, "Ha, I've got him now." That's exactly when we see that you can never suppress that. But
you can't shut it down. It will never be shut down. There's no way you can silence this beautiful mass. God will not allow it. God won't allow it. So yeah.
And in some respects, we're all hoping for a really holy Orthodox priest, a really good, strong leader. But
I'd settle for one who just shut up a bit.
Well, exactly. I was just about to say, you would settle for someone who just let it be and was a bit quieter, and just kind of let the church be. So yeah.
Didn't get so chatty on the plane.
Yeah.
Every time Pope Francis got on a plane, I was like, "Oh no, what's he going to say?"
Here we go again.
Breathing like rabbits or something.
yeah. Here she is. She's pregnant again with 5 kids behind her. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And them in their veils and kneeling. Oh my gosh.
And someone here, one of the columnists at the Telegraph wrote a very scathing article, which on the face of it might have looked very complimentary about Pope Francis. And he used the term ostentatious humility, because it's about, I want the most simple funeral and no attention drawn. And then you get some transgender identifying people and prostitutes and go, nothing to see here, folks. It's just, you don't want any attention drawn. And yet, the choices are.
I mean, you literally had the dregs of society, all these great sinners lined up at Santa Marta, greeting him as he came through. I mean, like, what?
Yeah, but it's just like, they're just people, right? So it's not that there's, we're all people, we're all sinners, but it's a bit like this awful kind of race, race baiting and stuff. It's like, let's make a thing about race. We're just humans. As soon as you start making a thing of it, let me highlight this, and you're from this country and you're from that culture and you have to pay reparations and you've got to apologize. All you're doing is dividing. So if you make a big thing and say, look, I welcome people who have same-sex attraction, and well, yeah, guess what? You've always been welcome. It's the church. It's for you. It's for sinners. It's for you and me. It's not just a club for holy, perfect people.
That's right. That's exactly right. Well, and it makes it look like he's only welcoming to them because he wanted to make sure that they were there and nobody else.
We weren't. Yeah, and faithful Catholics weren't there. That's what it looks like, doesn't it? They shut our churches down and everything and fill it up with all these people who don't care about any of it anyway.
It's like no Italian mamas from the TLM community. Oh, goodness. Well, I got to tell you, thank you so much. This has been not only insightful, but entertaining as well. Thank you so much. Katherine, Mark from Catholic Unscripted, if you have not been to their YouTube channel to just enjoy many of their podcasts, you really do have to engage. Make sure you subscribe to their channel. God bless you both. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Vicki. Great to see you.
All right. Take care. Thank you.